every touch point is critical in marketing. And some of the most unspoken touch points that come up are just one-on-one conversations that somebody inside your company is having with somebody outside of your company.
What does it really mean to be a thought leader in B2B? That's what we're here to find out. This is the Notorious Thought Leader, a podcast for B2B marketers who want to generate demand by creating content that builds credibility and thought leadership. In each episode, Erin Balsa helps demystify thought leadership and uncovers how companies are using thought leadership to generate demand. Let's get started.
My guest today is John Short, CEO at Compound Growth Marketing. Thanks for being here today, John.
Thanks for having me on, Aaron.
Happy to have you on. And just so listeners know, when I was working at the Predictive Index, CGM was actually our growth agency. So I have known John for probably close to 5 years now. And it was a great experience working with you. And I'm just super happy to have you on the show.
Yeah, I'm thrilled as well. I've made a lot of good friends from the people who we work with at Predictive Index. I was in touch with Drew the other day and have stayed in touch with Dad. So it's really nice to continue these relationships even after you've moved on.
For sure. Drew and Thad, if you're listening, and you better be listening, what up? I've stayed in touch with Drew and Thad too. They're two of my favorite people from PI. All right, John. So let's just get down to business and start with the question that's top of mind. What the fuck is thought leadership?
Yeah. So for me, I was thinking about this question leading up to the podcast, and there are a couple of things that came to my mind around thought leadership. One was, I think over the last 10 to 15 years, we've put a lot of pressure on the technology companies that are coming in and trying to save the world. And everybody feels like they need to have this huge perspective on what the world is going to look like in the future. And they need to have this differentiated perspective on their industry and how it's going to change over the last couple of years. And I think that's produced a lot of really positive conversation, but it's also produced situations like someone like Adam Newman, who is the co-founder of WeWork, who basically created this illusion that he was completely remaking commercial real estate, which when really he was just doing something quite similar to what was already being done with the Regus business model, and WeWork has proved to be equally successful. So I think there's a negative connotation that comes with thought leadership because of incidents and positions like that, where people have forced it onto an industry or a product where it's not necessary. At Workable, when I was there, we built out our content to focus on really actionable content, which was like more how-to focused content. And then we also had a blog which allowed the CEO and some of the other executives in the company and some of the really strong writers to kind of talk about what they were seeing in the industry and where they felt like the industry should be going. So to me, thought leadership is around the industry that you're in, the current state of things, and kind of leading the way in the continued evolution of the progress of that industry.
Yeah, and that's what you're talking about, having a strategy that's kind of holistic. You have that traditional, often optimized for search, educational content, and then you have your thought leadership kind of vision, future forward, net new take on content. And that's what I see the most often when I work with different companies or read different company blogs, follow companies on social. I tend to see that they have often both, and they're kind of two separate efforts. Is that what you see most often, or do you see some companies kind of combining the two into one content piece?
That's the perception for sure that I see. And I think that thought leadership often is a step ahead of where the rest of the industry is. And so there's going to be less demand. And ultimately, search is capture of demand of certain topics or interests that people have. And so I do think a lot of the brand marketers out there really prefer going to social because they can get a lot of engagement, get a lot of views, get a lot of readership through talking about things that people may not be looking for actively. They can kind of talk about their ideas. However, I think there's a place for demand creation or thought leadership inside of search. I think like when we're working with companies, we want to surround their persona with all the different topics that they may be searching for
Mm-hmm.
on their way to becoming a customer of your company or product. So that's the awareness stage, that paying stage, and that's the in market stage where they're looking for, a specific type of software. They're searching for your competitors and those types of things. And I think there are ways for you to capture someone's intent, bring them onto your site, and change their mind about how they think about certain things through the content that you have on your site. So an example of this is when we worked with Drift, they were all about conversational marketing, right? They
Mm-hmm.
had just brought that positioning to the front. That was their new positioning that they had come out with. They were looking to build that category. We worked with them a lot on building content around chat bots, and the language that people were using at that time. We still were able to bring those users in and get them to kind of adopt this idea of conversational marketing. And so I think it's all about thinking about the intent, thinking about the terminology that currently exists in the industry, and then using the content once they're on the site to kind of shift their mind, shift how they think about it, which ultimately should be the goal of what we're trying to do when we're getting users onto our site and getting people to read our content. We want them to think about it a little different way. So I do think thought leadership and SEO should work together, but unfortunately, most often we see two different camps. One content resource really focused on, hey, let's capture traffic from SEO, and the other one focused on, hey, what's our vision, our mission? What is the message we're trying to get out to the market? And I'd like
Mm-hmm.
to see those two things come together.
Yeah, I've seen it typically separate too. I love that example. We did a series at PI. I don't know if you remember several years back, but we were writing like a high performing hiring series. So we did a few search queries that had some search volume, like how to hire a BDR, how to hire a high performing, whatever it was. We did a bunch of these. And so that brought people onto the site organically because they had that need. It was
Right,
like demand for doing this thing. And then within this blog, we were able to introduce the concept of talent optimization, which was like our new discipline that we were trying to teach people or get people to be aware of. So that's like
right,
another example of how you can do that. Sometimes you can't do it. Like sometimes you can't force it if it's just not going to work. It's not always going to work 100% of the time, and that's okay. Like not every content piece obviously has to be optimized for search, and some of your efforts might be delivered via outbound sales reps, or it might be delivered at an event. Maybe you have like I know it sounds old fashioned, but it still works. Like sometimes printed out one sheets or, different QR codes where you have like a certain campaign at an event can work really well. So
right,
it's not to say everything has to be on the blog. I think that's another misconception too.
right. Not everything needs to be on the blog. Um, I think SEO is a channel that's difficult to ignore, but it's not the right strategy for everyone. And I simply just want to put it out there that thought leadership and search can work together.
They sure can. So, one thing you had talked about, well, one thing that we both have in common is we work with typically a lot of clients that are visionaries. They are trying to launch a new category or a new discipline. And, thought leadership is typically like a really good fit for that. One question that I ask everybody who comes on the show, I have that form, you filled it out. It's like 10 simple yes or no questions. And
Uh,
one question that you answered was, is a company's strategic narrative the greatest form of thought leadership? And that's a question I added, not because I heard people ask it. I was just curious because I see so many companies invest so many resources into coming up with a strategic narrative. And I really just wanted to know, like, is that the greatest form of thought leadership? So I have so far asked 19 people, and 17 said no, 2 said yes. And you were one of the 2 who said yes. And I would love to know why you said that.
Yeah, so I think that thought leadership exists. Like, I think sometimes thought leadership is forced. So I think the times when I've been most appreciative of thought leadership or when I've gotten most bought in on what a company is working on, I think it's when their product and things that they do back up the thought leadership that they're producing, right? So Predictive Index is a company that I think has a pretty incredible culture. And you all were focused on talent optimization. And when I would send when you were hiring and I would send Drew some candidates, he would always be asking me about like what profile I thought they would fit into within Predictive Index, right? He followed that. And I could tell by the way that you stay in touch with your team and the way that you have stayed in touch with the people at Predictive Index and the way that I've stayed in touch with the people who left Predictive Index since I've started working with them. It's like, it's a special team that does it differently. Drift is another example where we worked with them. They were really bought in on this idea of no forms. They didn't want to gate content. They wanted to connect with people on chat and really use their product to grow. And so I think that all helped them kind of build into that narrative. So I think when a company's strategic vision and what they're focused on from a product perspective, what they're focused on in terms of their core values, bleeds into thought leadership, I think it is the most valuable form of thought leadership. One more thing, I know I've talked a lot, but I think every touch point is critical in marketing. And some of the most unspoken touch points that come up are just one-on-one conversations that somebody inside your company is having with somebody outside of your company. So, and this is a place where I thought HubSpot and Drift have always done a really good job of, focusing on every touch point, making sure everybody inside the company is educated on what the strategic vision is for the business so they can speak about it eloquently at a dinner party, when they're out
Yes.
at the bar, at happy hour, all those types of things. And so when you truly have this core strategic vision that bleeds throughout the company, you get more people who are living up to the standards of that strategic vision, who understand it, who are able to speak to it in all of the different forms that they're, all in every single conversation, wherever it comes up. Hey, where do you work? Right? It can be a really powerful tool for you.
Yeah.
And so I've noticed that there's a high correlation between companies that live what they do, have a really strong strategic vision, and also have a really strong thought leadership strategy. Because I think it falls down a bit when you have one writer on your team who understands your industry really well, has a really strong voice, has spoken to a lot of the customers, but you're missing that throughout the rest of the company.
Yeah, I mean, what I'm hearing from you, which I have felt, when I was in PI, and it was authentic. It wasn't performative. Like, everyone was so bought in to this thing that we were building together, this new discipline of talent optimization. And that was what our strategic narrative was ultimately based on. And yeah, it's so true. When we hear a lot of talk about employee evangelism. And I think a lot of people think about employee evangelism as a LinkedIn thing. And they
Right.
think like, hey, if you can get your employees to share links or maybe add their own thoughts, that's employee evangelism. And it is, but it's so much deeper. Like, one thing that we had done at PI when we did announce the discipline internally, we helped people learn how to speak about it at cookouts. If they're
Right.
at a PTA function and
No
someone
way.
says,
Really?
yes, if someone says like, hey, where do you work? I could say, "Oh, the predictive index. Oh, what do they do? Oh, we're a tech company. Okay, boring." Or I could have this
Yeah.
compelling, like, 20-second elevator pitch that really draws you in and you wanna know more. So that
Right.
is something that is intentional that companies could do.
Yes. And I think companies try to jump too far, right?
Yeah.
So we you find companies that like immediately want everybody in the company to be posting to LinkedIn because
Yeah.
Griff did it
Mm-hmm.
really successfully a couple of years ago, or Chili Piper has done it really successfully. But getting to go inside that company and getting to talk with the CEO of Chili Piper recently, like a lot of meetings within Drift were really well put together, right? They had a
Mm-hmm.
meeting, I think it was every Monday, and they would talk about what was going on inside the company. They would talk about the impact, they would talk about the why. And that all led them to be really good at talking about their company outside of the doors of the company. And so, but that's powerful what
Yeah.
Predictive Index did. And I think you all certainly are one of the ones that did a great job at creating a category and making your product interesting.
For sure. So, talking about internal meetings, I had never been to an all company meeting, anything like the predictive index. I remember sitting there in my first month. I was like, companies have meetings like this? This is
Yeah.
wild. It was so good. The crowd was so engaged. There was like laughter and all these different speakers, and it was all tied with a thread, which was ultimately like why we're all here, really helping everyone in the company understand business metrics. We did like an MBA in a day for all new employees so they could really participate in these meetings on a different level. When they're hearing
Yeah.
different terms like CAC and bookings, they actually know what this means. And I mean, when I came to PI think I was like 38, 37. I had never been at a meeting like that in my entire career. It was wild. And it's just amazing how many companies don't do that. It's such a missed opportunity.
Right. Yeah, and it's like I hate presenting, and we have every quarter we have a quarterly offsite where the executive team goes off site, and then within the next week, within the rules of our business operating system are that I need to present our findings within 1 week of that meeting to the rest of the company, and it's been a challenge.
Mm,
I think but seeing companies like Predictive Index, seeing Drift, seeing, hearing about HubSpot, hearing about even some of the meetings inside of companies like Bain and other places like that, you can start to understand how important it is in terms of everybody in your company being an advocate for what's
yeah.
going on and really getting people bought in. And so I've really tried to up the level of my presentation and up the level of engagement in those meetings. But
It's
I
awesome.
that's fascinating. I'm really happy to hear that Predictive Index put such an emphasis on their internal meetings because it fits with the hypothesis that I've built around this over the last couple of years.
Totally. It does matter for sure. So when you're working with a new client, I know it's something that, it takes time to really build that process so that you're able to onboard new clients and make the best decisions for them based on their unique situation and needs. So I'm curious, when you're onboarding a new client, how do you decide whether or not thought leadership needs to be part of the growth plan?
Yeah. So part of what we do when we're onboarding a new client is we want to meet with all the stakeholders in the business to understand if they have a really strong point of view in the world. Because I think that is one of the key recipes for really strong thought leadership. And then we go through what we call the buyer intent journey, which is looking at the different content we can create and the persona and the inflection points that are happening inside of companies from the awareness stage to the pain stage to the in market stage. And so we want to understand where the opportunities are for us, where we can help them, which is oftentimes through LinkedIn and SEO strategy, and really understand, do they have a message that's going to stand out? And at what points in the buyer journey can we get that in front of the customers who we're working with? But to be quite honest, a lot of it is driven from the CEO's vision, the CMO's vision, and the product vision to understand if they truly have a differentiated perspective that they're talking about that they can truly build like thought leadership from.
You talk in the past, I've heard you talk a lot about these inflection points. Could you just kind of double click on that for anyone who may not be familiar with the term, exactly what you mean by inflection point and why it's so important to pay attention to inflection points?
Yeah. So for a long time in my career, there was a lot of focus on the personas that we were going after. And so I remember there'd be like, a Facebook fill up, and this is
Yeah.
somebody who likes to be on Facebook and they post every day and they like tools like Facebook that have a timeline built into them so they can see the tasks or activities or whatever is going
Don't
on.
forget he drinks green tea.
Right.
Yeah.
Drinks green tea and that's useful. But I think as I've as my career has progressed, I've seen that the challenges that are happening inside the company can oftentimes lead to helping understand what companies need support from in the form of content. So, like an inflection point could be if you're a CRM company and you sell to small to mid-sized businesses and you see a software as a service company, a SaaS company just raised a Series B. That's usually a signal that they found product market fit, they found some channels that work and are about to scale up their sales and marketing team. So they may be looking to bring on a new CRM to help them with the challenges that they might have with scaling. If you are an architect, an office architect in a city like New York or Boston, it's going to be helpful for you to know when companies have just leased new space in your area, because those companies that just leased office space or who are looking for office space in that area are likely going to need an architect to help them design the space better in the future. So I think just as important as the personas are is understanding the challenges or what's going on inside of a company
Mm.
to make them start to need your product, right? It could be a
Mhm.
pain. A lot of time in SaaS, it's, you have a specific feature like a company's having challenges figuring out how to qualify leads or having challenges figuring out how to manage leads. And that's just one feature within the CRM. And your job there is to build and create demand in order to get them to want to use your product. But yeah, that's the overview on inflection points though. I think it's incredibly powerful for me to kind of come up with different ideas of the types of campaigns and content we can get in front of people in order to start building trust and get them interested in our product.
That's awesome. When I think of inflection points, sometimes I even go more wide, like thinking about, market trends or, global shifts that are impacting many businesses within a certain market or industry vertical. So, like, for example, economic downturn or, when we had the great resignation, like a lot of times those topics lend themselves well to specific marketing campaigns. Is that something that you
Yes.
pay attention to as well?
Yeah, 100 absolutely. I think, the slowdown we've seen over the last 6 months has led a lot of our customers to have longer deal cycles. So our focus in the funnel has shifted a little bit to think about what are the ways that we can show ROI in order to get customers to, be able to sell this up in the organization easier.
Mm,
Um, I think there, for me, I think or I think a lot of companies right now, as the economy has slowed down, need to take another look at who their best customers are, because there are winners and losers being created right now. I think, if you look at e-commerce over the past 6 months or the past year, it's been a struggling industry. And so understanding those inflection points and how that shifts, and maybe we don't want to sell into D2C brands because they're really getting hurt by the iOS changes and are less or growing slower because Facebook is less impactful. So
mm.
understanding what's going on in the background of those companies can help you come up with a solution or shift your focus even to a different type of customer. Does that make sense?
It does, and it makes me think too. I know me personally as, an earlier marketer or even mid-career marketer, I really thought that my job really started and ended with getting somebody to, request a demo or buy a product. And then it was like, okay, hands off, that's all I do. But during certain periods of time, like right now, especially if sales cycles are longer, maybe your best place to squeeze yourself in, or maybe you evolve the content strategy to focus more on sales enablement, provided you're a smaller company and you don't have a specific function dedicated to sales enablement. Maybe your time is better spent 40% there and then 60% trying to generate client acquisition. So
Yeah.
that's just something worth talking about too, especially for the smaller companies and smaller teams.
Yeah, absolutely. I think thinking about the revenue acceleration opportunities and thinking about how you can support sales is valuable, and shifting your focus as a content marketer can be used to help that as well.
Just thinking about the business first and not just you first, like thinking beyond just your budget and your team and just really thinking what's going to be the most impactful for the entire company sometimes
Yeah.
can get you places, right?
Yep.
So I know we're coming up on time, so I have two more questions for you. I would love to know which person or company do you think does a great job with thought leadership?
Yeah, so I had a couple. The first one that came to my mind was VergeSense. I think that they're in the uh, office space utilization industry. And so I think they've done a great job at kind of building their brand and start building out thought leadership, especially at this kind of critical point. You're talking about inflection points.
Mm,
There's the return to the office, or this explosion of remote work. And so I think VergeSense is doing a really interesting job there. Predictive Index and Drift are two of my favorites. They always will be, but I had previously mentioned them, so I didn't want to kind of use that one again. And then, going back to your thoughts on, is thought leadership for everyone? I think another company that's doing really interesting work in the automotive repair space
hmm,
is Parts Tech. And usually when I think about thought leadership, I think about, tech companies that are selling
yeah.
into tech companies that are, preaching this vision of what the future might look like and how everything needs to change. But I thought Parts Tech was an interesting one that is in a category that sells into, I don't want to say a less sophisticated buyer, but a less, because it's a really sophisticated buyer, but a less tech forward buyer. And so I think they've done a fantastic job speaking to their audience and helping their audience evolve into using some modern systems.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. A lot of people in this kind of like narrow B2B SaaS land, it's like we forget there's this whole other world out there and we think that we're the only ones that are doing thought leadership well. But a lot of times, thought leadership is so critical and necessary in other industries. Like, you have manufacturing, there's so much,
Right,
digital adoption and innovation and like manufacturing that right now. It's like wild. It's like ripe for more thought
right,
leadership. And
right.
maybe they're just not as maybe educated that this is like a trend and a thing. So like less companies are doing it, but it's for sure there could be great examples of thought leadership in any corner. I know I had a
Right.
guest on. She was like, you could have a thought leader in paper making. You could have a thought leader in the sex industry. And you
Yeah.
really can, right? It's just all
Right.
about having that big vision, that unique POV,
Yeah.
something unique to say.
Yeah. It might be mostly needed in manufacturing. That's an industry that's in need of a little bit of an overhaul. So, uh,
Hella interesting. I always thought it was
yes,
boring until I actually started learning about it. I'm like, this is actually really interesting.
I think that's been one of my favorite things since starting my own company, is getting to go out into the world, meet a ton of people with different perspectives, and not just in the software industry. So I was in this like
Yeah.
little bubble for 12 years, and I really enjoy hearing different stories, listening and hearing about the different industries that exist out there. So
For sure.
it sounds like you're enjoying that too.
I love it. And like the weirdest thing that I find is with every new client I take on, I am able to like connect dots between like their messaging and their, ICP and these other clients. And I just keep getting like a more robust story. And
Yeah.
I know it's like the whole thing about pattern matching. And it's just so much. I think, more helpful as a creator and a strategist to be able to experience all of these different companies. And it helps a lot, at least for me.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a sign of a really good consultant, is somebody who does love to hear about how different and what makes different industries tick,
It's
and
fascinating.
being able to make those pattern match and make those connections between the different industries.
So, last words, John. If you were to leave our listeners with one bit of advice, could be anything, business, personal, what would that be?
I think from a business perspective, it's getting to become curious about who your customers are, what makes them tick, and the different inflection points that they're going through. I think that, just relying on personas can help spur some creativity, but really getting into the issues that they're facing and understanding the solutions that are available to them or that could become available to them has been one of the areas where I've found the most creativity and coming up with new ideas in my career.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing, and thank you for coming on. This has been so much fun to catch up with you, and I'm sure our listeners are going to take a lot out of the conversation. So thanks again.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, have a great day.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of the Notorious Thought Leader. If you're looking for more stories from marketers who are generating demand from thought leadership, then visit us at motionagency.io/notorious. See you next time.